Herkese merhaba. Yapı Kredi Kültür Sanat'ta devam etmekte olan Hayat, Ölüm Aşk ve Adalet sergisinin etkinliklerine bu akşam Forensic Architecture sanatçı konuşmasıyla devam ediyoruz. I'm giving a short introduction in Turkish and then we're going to continue with the talk by Forensic Architecture. Forensic Architecture dünya çapında devlet şiddeti ve insan hakları ihlallerini araştırmak amacıyla adli vakaların incelenmesinde mekansal ve mimari teknikleri kullanan çok disiplinli ve Londra merkezli bir araştırma grubu. Bu akşam Forensic Architecture'da direktör yardımcılığı yapan Robert Trafford araştırmasını üstlendiği Triple Chaser isimli video çalışması üzerine konuşacak. Triple Chaser, serginin işaretlediği adalet ve ölüm kavramlarıyla ilişkileniyor. Video çalışmasıyla ilgili kısa bir bilgiyi de vermek isterim. Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nin Meksika sınır görevlileri Kasım 2018'de Sivillere göz yaşartıcı gaz bombası attığında fotoğraflar bu el bombalarının çoğunun dünyanın en büyük sözde daha öldürücü mühimmat üreticilerinden biri olan Safari Grup tarafından üretildiğini gösterdi. Safariland grubu Whitney Müzesi'nin mütevelli heyeti başkan yardımcısı Warren Candles'a ait. Forensic Architecture'ın 2019'da Whitney Bienali'ne davet edilmeleri üzerine ürettikleri bu çalışma, sanat sermaye ilişkisini, sanat dünyasındaki çelişkileri ve samimiyeti analitik ve gerçekçi bir yaklaşımla ele alıyor. Konuşma sırasında sorularınız olursa lütfen chat bölümüne yazın. Konuşma bittiğinde biz sorularınızı konuşmamıza ileteceğiz. Sorularınızı Türkçe ya da İngilizce de sorabilirsiniz. Bu konuşma daha sonra İngilizce altyazıyla tekrar yayınlanacaktır. Konuşmamızın dili İngilizce olacak. Son olarak da bu etkinliğin organizasyonunu yürüten ekip arkadaşım Ahsen Erdoğan ve teknik işlerle ilgilenen Aykut Yılmaz ve sosyal medya editörü Mine Bölen'e çok teşekkür ederim. Hello Robert, thank you for your patience and thank you for joining us. I just gave a little introduction, short introduction in Turkish, and now the stage is yours.
Wonderful, thank you very much. So, let me share my screen. So, good evening, everybody, and thank you to Didem and Ahsen and the team for inviting me and for making this event possible. My name is Robert Trafford, or Bob Trafford, and I'm an assistant director with Forensic Architecture, which is a research agency based at the University of London. By training, I'm a journalist and an open source researcher and open source investigator. I joined Forensic Architecture around 6 years ago. And today I want to talk to you mostly about one of our investigations, which brings together issues of toxic clouds and toxic philanthropy. And this is our 2019 video investigation, Triple Chaser, which was produced in partnership with Laura Poitras's Praxis Films.
Excuse me, Robert. Robert, your microphone is off.
Gosh, excuse me, that's a good start, isn't it? Okay, let me begin again from the top. Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you to Didem and Ahsen and to the team for inviting me and for making this event possible and for reminding me when I'm on mute. My name is Bob Trafford, or Robert Trafford, and I'm an assistant director with Forensic Architecture, which is an investigative research agency based at the University of London. Now, by training, I am a journalist and an open source investigator. I joined Forensic Architecture just over 6 years ago. Today, I want to talk to you about one of our investigations, which brings together two particularly interesting phenomena which occur in our work, and these are issues of toxic clouds and of toxic philanthropy. This investigation is our 2019 film, with Laura Poitras and her Praxis Films, Triple Chaser, which film has been screened at Life, Death, Love and Justice this year. So Forensic Architecture was founded around 10 years ago within the University of London, where I'm presenting to you from today. And since across those 10 years, we've conducted around 80 investigations into human rights violations all around the world, on every continent, always with and indeed on behalf of communities and individuals and families who are suffering under state violence and repression and suffering the consequences of environmental racism and corporate environmental destruction, police violence, colonial legacies, and many other kinds of repression and state harm. And now the way that we investigate those cases is through a range of advanced techniques.
Bob, your mic is just cut off again. I think you need to, so while you're talking, your mic suddenly turns off. So please make sure that your mic is always on. I think it's probably a technical failure.
Yeah. Hello. Hi. Yes, I don't know why my microphone is doing that. Excuse me. You can hear me now. So using these digital models, we produce evidence for legal forums and for media organizations, for human rights advocacy groups, but also, as you see here on the screen, for cultural institutions and for gallery exhibitions. We are particularly at home in the gallery. Here you see some images from our ongoing exhibition at the HKW, which is presenting our investigations into a very serious terrorist attack in the south of Germany in 2020. And the use of those cultural spaces for us is particularly important when the state, who is often the subject of our investigation, as in these images, we are investigating police failure in response to a right-wing racist attack, where the state controls the political process, where legal processes cannot always be guaranteed to protect the individual from the state or to deliver the appropriate investigation of the state or indeed justice or accountability, we must find other spaces in which to produce our evidence. And very successfully, we have done that in art galleries. And when we bring that kind of human rights work into art galleries, that means bringing human rights and the artistic world into collision through our practice. And it's really in this concept that the story of Triple Chaser begins. So we were invited to exhibit a new installation at the 2019 Whitney Biennial, the Whitney Museum of American Art. And it would become a remarkable case not only of institutional critique, but what we've come to call institutional confrontation, inviting elements of a cultural institution to come into contact with one another, to come into tension with one another, and to productively rub up against each other, I suppose. Now, the Whitney Biennial was, of course, a hugely prestigious commission and an opportunity for us to present our ideas to an American audience through a huge platform. But around the time that we were commissioned, a very iconic photo emerged in the US media. It was the remarkable product of a sadly all too unremarkable indeed event. Violence against refugees and migrants at the borders between Mexico and the US, here in November 2018 between Tijuana and San Diego. Now you see in this photo the use of tear gas against particularly vulnerable groups, and really tear gas for us in recent years has become a particularly interesting object of study. Why? Because in many respects, it constitutes the perfect counter-protest tool by police. As my colleagues Samane Moafi and Eyal Weissman have written, where protests are centrifugal, they bring people together, they draw people together into collective strength, tear gas is centripetal. It breaks people apart, it pushes people apart, fragmenting the power of the crowd. And it is, in essence, the acceptable face of chemical weapons. It is the perfect weapon for police forces and security forces to administer violence, neither with effort nor with precision. It's the use of a kind of airborne violence to choke the life out of public spaces and to erase, even preemptively erase, our civic right to protest. And so it was here, really in this image, that the story of Triple Chaser really began, because what came next was a fascinating example of how civil society can respond to cases of human rights violations, and how then forensic architecture can contribute its technical skills to support robust and rooted and indeed distributed activism. So it was quickly reported that the manufacturer of the tear gas that had been fired against these refugees and migrants at the Tijuana border was owned by a senior member of the Board of Trustees at the Whitney Museum, a man called Warren Kanders. And suddenly this intersection of culture and human rights became once again extremely visible and indeed extremely close to us. And we felt it was urgently necessary for us to respond and to address this controversy in our work. The film that we produced would then push in a couple of directions at once. One was a technical response, I suppose, to develop a computer vision tool, a tool that could recognize tear gas canisters in open source material to create new possibilities, new opportunities for human rights monitoring and investigation. Our goal was that wherever Warren Kanders tear gas grenades were used anywhere in the world, our technology could be used to find them. But really, what does it mean to train an algorithm to see? Well, first we had to develop a digital model of that tear gas grenade. And why? Well, because training an algorithm to see requires many, many thousands of image examples of the object in question. But there were not so many thousands of images of Warren Kanders tear gas grenades. And so to make up that gap, what we had to do was to produce these images digitally. We use computer game engine software, as you see here. This is the Unreal game engine. And what we did was to generate thousands of images of these triple chaser grenades. First, within photorealistic environments such as this. Again, this is a created environment within the Unreal game engine. And then slowly, and within these outlandish, decontextualized environments where the photorealistic images of the algorithm provide a challenge for the learning process. These photorealistic images, which they ask the algorithm to spot the grenade among a sort of lifelike environment. Here, these decontextualized images, they provide a different kind of training. These are almost like you might say a free hit. These are environments in which the algorithm finds it very easy to identify the grenade, because the background is so outlandish and decontextualized, so it gives it a kind of practice. You see a number of these. Now, Kanders was, in fact, not only in the tear gas business, but also in the bullets business. He profited financially from the sale of bullets that were manufactured by a company called Sierra Bullets. And our work also explored connections between that manufacturer and the deaths of dozens of men and women and children at the hands of Israeli security forces during the protests of return in Gaza in the summer of 2018. Now, as we were working, that controversy that began at the border in Tijuana was expanding. An activist group known as WAGE called on artists to withhold their work from the biennial, in part over the institution's relationships with Kanders, but also over staff conditions. And alongside Wage's campaign, a remarkable direct action campaign began, organized by Decolonize This Place, which is an activist network based out of New York. Over 9 weeks, this group, they took over the Whitney's public spaces. They held demonstrations, they held public lectures. And this group, which is rooted in and founded by individuals from Palestine and beyond, who have within their group the situated experience of occupation, apartheid, subjugation, extractivism, and police brutality, often in the form of the use of tear gas. This group began to take over the Whitney spaces. These actions, they were constantly innovative, uncompromising. They were always grassroots. And as an agency, Forensic Architecture undoubtedly learned a great deal from being connected to them. And Forensic Architecture indeed contributed additional research to support these actions, identifying the use of Safariland tear gas in Puerto Rico, for example, which is one of the subject of Decolonize This Place's 9 weeks of art and action. In addition, indeed, our director put his name to a list of academics and critics and theorists who were supporting the actions of Decolonize and calling for Candace to resign his position. And all of this was before the show had even begun. So when this show indeed did begin, on the day of the black tie opening gala at the biennial, at which Warren Candace was, of course, in attendance, we like to think that many at that party were suddenly checking their phones as we published the text of our investigation into Sierra Bullets, laying out our findings, which connected the company to this egregious and illegal violence that we saw perpetrated in Gaza in 2018. The film Triple Chaser itself was also made available to the general public only a week or two after it debuted in the Whitney. Now, a month later, with the biennial in full swing, 3 former contributors who had been involved in previous controversies over the work exhibited at the Whitney wrote an open letter which came to define this exhibition, giving it the name the Tear Gas Biennial. And the artists indeed called for the exhibitors to withdraw their work from the show. Around this time, we made what also felt like something of a breakthrough in our own open source research. A source in Palestine helped us to locate this, what you see here, what could be the bullet which connected Sierra Bullets to Gaza and to the violence of that 2018 summer. This was a bullet which was found at the scene of that violence along the perimeter fence at the border between the Gaza Strip and Israel. And it was a bullet that was found by partners of ours who conducted on-the-ground research. And it was then our visual analysis which associated this bullet with Sierra Bullets. We discussed the situation in the office. You can imagine that this was a particularly fraught time as we weighed the value of our presence in that biennial, the opportunity to bring that work directly into the space versus the potential power of withdrawal. And we came indeed to the decision to become the 8th exhibitor to withdraw from the Whitney Biennial. And a handful of others soon followed. By now, the Whitney stood to lose nearly a third of the exhibitors of its flagship exhibition. Indeed, before the Whitney then could even arrange to have our works and other works removed from the show, we received the news that we had been fighting for. Warren Candace resigned his position on the board. When Warren Candace resigned this position on the board as a result, something vital had been demonstrated about the potential for the cross-forum pursuit of accountability. The way that forensic architecture works is to be operative in as many forums as possible. Only on Friday, I was presenting our work in a political inquiry, a parliamentary inquiry in the south of Germany. We work in national courtrooms, in international courtrooms, and we also take the very same work into art galleries to attempt to have precisely this kind of impact. because what had happened here through Triple Chaser was that we and the other exhibitors who had threatened to withdraw the work, decolonize this place, Wage, and the other activist groups who had fought so robustly and so innovatively and creatively in pursuit of accountability, they had really set a collision course between exhibitor and host, and demonstrated that really in the legacy of institutional critique, that this mode of institutional confrontation could be pursued toward the realization of political and social goals. And I think what's interesting about this is that Warren Kander's capacity to profit from extractive, violent capitalism, to sell his tear gas around the world, was in fact untouchable in legal and political circumstances. Of course, his actions were not illegal. He was within his rights to make money in this way, his rights defined as they are within US law. And of course, he was protected by the prevailing winds of US politics, which are more than comfortable with this kind of corporate extractive capitalism. It was only, in fact, in the domain of the arts that any kind of punching up could be successful. But when individuals like Warren Kander's attempt to launder their reputations through association with cultural institutions of such magnitude, it's only there that he exposes himself to potential negative consequences to his profiting from border violence and border regimes, and indeed the use of these chemical munitions against protesters and vulnerable minorities. Indeed, echoes of this potential can be read in the 2019 resignation of Jana Peel from the board of London's Serpentine Gallery after her husband's connections to Israeli cyber surveillance manufacturer, the NSO Group, were exposed. And I'm proud to note that a few months later, Triple Chaser was named by the New York Times Magazine as one of the 25 most influential pieces of modern American protest art. Because in some respects, Triple Chaser became a perfect example of a forensic architecture investigation. It was a broad international coalition from NGOs to lawyers to citizen activists to award-winning Academy Award-winning filmmakers, a coalition which spanned the world and spanned so many disciplines, and within which context forensic architecture could develop innovative new technical tools for the pursuit of accountability. But these tools only operated in service to a movement that was independent of us, to which we were contributors and not leaders. A movement which was led by individuals who were themselves the victims of racialized extractive capitalism, of occupation, of domination expressed through tear gas. And so to end, I want to briefly discuss another of these technical tools which we have developed, again in response to the use of tear gas, a means of making this airborne violence visible, of making it measurable, and through that to further civil society's opportunities to challenge the use and indeed the normalization of what are, in effect, domestic chemical weapons. To do this, I want to take you here to Santiago de Chile. I'll turn the volume down while I speak. So here you're looking at a short clip of anti-government protests that filled the streets in Santiago de Chile in December 2019, crowds that the Chilean police would soon use chemical agents to disperse. Here, for example, we see in the central square very early in the day that even before crowds have come together in any significant number, tear gas is already being used. And something that we see is so common around the world is that tear gas is routinely used preemptively, that it is assumed that this is something which can solve problems for police officers before they arrive. Now, as the day wears on, we see, in fact, that more than 600 tear gas grenades were used by police. Here you see in a GoPro video shot from the roof of a nearby building, you see how we identify hundreds, literally hundreds of tear gas grenades used in the space of just one afternoon, a handful of hours. But tear gas does not simply vanish it is heavier than air, of course, so it stays around, it clings to surfaces and to urban fabrics, to clothes and to human bodies. But it is a powder, it is a near invisible substance to the human eye. And so together with scientists from Imperial College London, at Forensic Architecture, we have developed a means of showing precisely how that tear gas moves and where it settles. Now, it begins with what you see here and with this interplay between the scene as we see it in the camera and the scene as modeled in our digital environment. You see many numbers all across the screen here. These are time and space coordinates of the locations of tear gas grenades. We locate each of these tear gas grenades in space and in time, and then we situate those locations, we call them emission points, within a digital model of the environment. Next, what we do is we use what we call computer fluid dynamics. Computer fluid dynamics is a mathematical modeling of how one fluid moves within another. In this case, how airborne CS, one of the most common tear gas chemicals, how it moves within air. So as we play this, what you see is that as the tear gas grenades emit their emissions, as they shed CS into the environment, we can model according to the weather that we knew occurred that day. We can model where that tear gas moves to. And what you see, the brightly colored pattern on the ground there, is of course the deposition, which is to say where CS lands according to this simulation. Now, so much of forensic architecture's work is about using digital models as venues for a range of different kinds of evidence, such as this kind of digital evidence, of reconstructing events which have already taken place, just recently taken place, in order to reveal new information about them. So here we take what is known about the tear gas grenade, we take what is known about their location and time of the emission of those tear gas grenades, what is known about the urban fabric, what is known about the weather. We bring all these pieces of evidence together into this three-dimensional map of how tear gas moved around the Plaza de la Dignidad that day, how it moved, and where it settled. And this means that for the first time, we can capture and quantify the violence that is perpetrated by the use of tear gas. We can begin to hold this diffuse and airborne and intangible violence up to measurable standards. Here, for example, a measurable standard. Using this methodology, we could demonstrate that concentration levels in the air on that day reached, as you see here, over 50 milligrams per meter squared. A concentration, meter cubed, excuse me. A concentration in a density of air of around 55 milligrams per meter cubed. And now for comparison, we would say that the US federal government determines that a concentration of just 2 milligrams, not 55, but 2 milligrams is what they call an immediate danger to life and health. And when harm can be quantified in this way, made somehow more concrete, it can be leveraged, it can be challenged. This work indeed has contributed to legal challenges against the Chilean police. And this we see as a key component in civil society's arsenal, its toolkit to fight back against this kind of airborne violence, because to challenge it first, we must grab hold of it. And now this 2 milligram level is a US federal government standard. And indeed, we are coming for the US government next, we hope. We look to and here I show you a work in progress image from our next application of this technology from a US city, where we are analyzing the use of tear gas following the murder of George Floyd in 2020, in the second half of 2020. And I can tell you that the concentrations that we are finding within our simulation are far in excess even of 55 milligrams per meter cube. We're talking about concentrations which are hundreds of times in excess of the level that the federal government itself says is an immediate danger to life and health. So finally, I want to come back to Triple Chaser. A few months after the biennial came down, we learned that Candace was looking to sell up and to move out of the tear gas business altogether. And so in a working environment and a working field in contemporary human rights, in which often what we consider to be, let's say, wins can be quite hard to come by, we see that this was not only an opportunity to punch up, in English we would say to bloody the nose of somebody who has long profited from violence against others, and from a system which protects that means of profit and encourages that means of profit. Let's not forget that the US government is one of the major purchasers of tear gas, of course, within the world. And that same government determines the rules by which Candace is protected in his profits. We see that something vital has been demonstrated here. We show that there is a means through artistic forums to provide a measure of accountability where the legal and the political forums cannot simply touch individuals like this. So there's no doubt that we are once again at a very interesting time in the history of a debate which resurfaces periodically. What is this relationship between the artistic forums and human rights? How should we understand the requirements upon institutions, the moral and ethical requirements upon institutions to confront the sources of their own funding and the sources of their own governance? There, I think I will leave it. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions and to your reflections. And I'll hand back over to you, Didem, for some questions. Thank you. Can I have the first question? Should I stop sharing my screen?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Robert, for this exciting talk. I think to see this direct change in real life through art, it's something very hopeful, and it's also very revolutionary, I must say.
Very kind.
Sorularınız varsa şu anda YouTube chat bölümüne yazabilirsiniz. Lütfen çekinmeyin. Kötü soru yoktur. Yorumunuz varsa da yorum ya da sorularınızı yazabilirsiniz. Maybe I'll take this moment to ask a question myself. Belki bu sırada benim bir sorum var. Onu sormak istiyorum. So first I'm gonna say this in English. So many organizations working against the human rights violations often remain marginalized, but through art field and exhibitions and this politically charged topics become more visible and reach more people. And then there's a hope for change and the direct possibility for change. And you mentioned that the exhibition in Hanau, there was this moment that you mentioned earlier while we were preparing this conversation. Could you share this experience with our listeners? It would be brilliant.
I certainly can.
And
absolutely.
Yes. I'll just repeat my question in Turkish. Sorumu şimdi Türkçe sormak istiyorum. İnsan hakları ihlalleriyle ilgilenen birçok grubun çalışması maalesef ötekileşebiliyor ve birçok insana ulaşamıyor. Ama sanat ve sergi aracılığıyla daha çok insana ulaşıyor ve daha çok aslında bu konular görünür oluyor ve Triple Chaser örneğinde gördüğümüz gibi de aslında bir değişime de gerçek hayatta ve politik anlamda bir değişime yol açabiliyor. Robert konuşmadan az önce Almanya'da ve Hanau sergisinde de Triple Chaser'daki benzer gibi direkt bir değişimden bahsetti. Bu konuyu da biraz anlatmasını sordum. We're listening you, Robert.
Wonderful, thank you. So right now we continue to work with the families and the survivors of an extremely serious terrorist attack, a neo-Nazi terror attack, which occurred in Germany in February of 2020 in a town called Hanau. And this investigation has so far produced two video reports in the style that you may be familiar with if you know our work, the use of digital models to interrogate police testimony and video footage to shine new light on aspects of a case which is extremely troubling and which reveals a great deal of failure and mismanagement by the police in this part of Germany. Now, the incident that you're referring to occurred in June, on the 3rd of June of this year. The day before that, we had opened an exhibition in Frankfurt where we exhibited these two works, these two videos, along with murals and graphic timelines and radio presentations and all manner of material relating to this case. And a remarkable thing happened the day after the opening. We invited the chairman of the parliamentary inquiry in that state of Hessen, which was investigating this case. We invited him to come and to see the work, and indeed he came. And now we didn't necessarily expect this. We thought this was remarkable enough. We considered that this is a really interesting opportunity where we have built the space. We, together with the initiative that supports the families, together with the families themselves, have built this space. For politicians to come and step into that is for them to step well out of their comfort zone, and indeed they did. But what was most remarkable was that in that very exhibition, in that room, alongside family members of the victims, the chair of this inquiry saw new evidence for the first time. And really, you should have seen his face. He said, "Where did you get this evidence? How did you know this? Why don't we have this evidence?" By this time, the inquiry had been running for a year. And for us, it was a very remarkable example of how we call our work counter-forensics. We say that forensics is the process of the state. Forensics is what the police do. Counter-forensics is what civil society does. Or we take the forensic gaze and we turn it back on the state. We invert that forensic gaze. And what this requires is precisely using forums in this way, taking politicians into art galleries, showing them robust legal political evidence in art galleries, repurposing a space like the Frankfurter Kunstverein, which is a contemporary art environment, institution, and turning it into this engine for political accountability and legal accountability. It was a really remarkable example of something that forensic architecture has been saying in its theorizing, saying to ourselves and saying in our presentations and in our theory for a long time. And really with this case, we are beginning to see just how strongly we can influence political processes and influence processes of accountability from the outside, and that is most effectively done within cultural institutions, when those cultural institutions are oriented in the right way and really used in the right way, and when they allow themselves to be used in those ways.
Well, I think, I think the exhibitions, it's very important to think and imagine and experience exhibition spaces as encounter, spaces for encounter. And it's it's a very basic thing. And exhibitions can be a space for escape from everyday life, just to see an art, have fun, to learn something. And I think there are different roles of what exhibition can be. And I think what forensic architecture is doing is through art, like really, it's an excellent bridge between the art and politics, and I think there's so much learned from there.
We are certainly learning it ourselves.
Evet, sergilerin aslında giderek çok dönüştürücü alanlar olduğundan ve karşılaşma alanları olduğundan sergiler bir sanat eserine bakarak keyif alabileceğimiz ama aynı zamanda öğrenebileceğimiz alanlarda. Mine, sosyal medyada çalışan arkadaşım Mine Bölen bir soru iletti şu anda. There is a question. Thank you for the presentation, Bob. Did you say that Whitney Museum commissioned you a work for the biennial? Sunum için teşekkürler. Whitney Müzesi'nin Whitney Müzesi'nin size yeni bir iş commission, yani yeni bir iş ürettiğinden mi bahsetmiş, söylediniz? Umarım doğru çevirdim.
Yes, that's absolutely right. They commissioned us to produce a new work. Of course, they didn't commission us to produce specifically this work, but I must say that the curators with whom we worked were extremely accommodating and happy. They did not stand in our way as we said, this is the work that we will produce. And of course, for so many exhibitors to threaten to withdraw from a show puts those curators who had given us a great deal of space and time and leeway, it puts them in a very difficult position and threatens them in a respect. So it was a difficult confrontation to manage in that respect. And it really, I think it's there that you see what I mentioned at the start of this talk, that it's really, when it works as it did in the case of Triple Chaser, the production of the work, the presentation of the work invites different parts of these museums to come into confrontation with one another. For the curators to come into confrontation with the board of trustees and to work that relationship out. So yes, they did indeed commission us. I want, if I may, I just want to return to the comment that you made before, because I think it's really important about audiences in art galleries. And I think this goes not only for the exhibition I spoke just about in Hanau, but also for the Whitney Biennial, because there is undoubtedly a certain disposition that people carry with them into cultural institutions. You know, what I say often that it's the only place that we can be sure that people will spend 35 minutes even with one of our films, that they will give that patient, careful attention. You know, I was in the HKW in Berlin doing a guided tour of our exhibition just on Sunday, this weekend. And, you know, you see people walking with notebooks, taking notes and researching from our presentation. This kind of interaction with an audience is functionally impossible anywhere else. And this is very important because what we want to do with the issues that we present in these cases is not only to present the issues, but also to create publics around those issues. You know, we understand that that publics, that active communities, they have to be brought into existence around political issues, around human rights issues. And it's exactly in art galleries that we see that happen when we have 100, 150 people at a time gathering around our work, engaging with it, learning from it, exchanging with it. You know, we learn a great deal every time we exhibit. And this is where publics, this is where civil society grows its strength and grows its mutual strength, how it trades its strength and how it learns from itself.
Well, I can't agree more. I actually want to share a brief experience from our exhibition at Yapı Kredi Kültür Sanat, Life That Love and Justice. Few weeks ago, I received an email by a university student, and she came to see the exhibition, and she just wanted to reach us to say that she was very inspired, and she wrote paper about the exhibition. And I was saying to my colleagues, like, actually, this is much more valuable to me than maybe like a praise by an art critic. So I totally feel you. Of course, it's on a different level, but just wanted to mention that briefly. Bir soru daha var. Forensic architecture. So there's another question. Forensic architecture choose the projects. How does forensic architecture choose the projects to work on? What are your ground rules, or how do you prioritize as there are so many cases in the world? Very good question.
Very good question.
Kısaca çevirmek gerekirse o kadar çok konu var ki bu alanda forensic architecture çalışıcı projeleri ve konuları nasıl seçiyor, nasıl bir yönteme ve belki kategoriye göre seçiyor?
It's a question that we deal with a lot. It's a question, you know, as the person who asked this question has identified, we have many more times requests for our work than we can possibly take on. You know, we are a team of, here in London, we are around 25. In Berlin now, we are almost 10. So we have a number of researchers and many projects ongoing at once, but there are so many cases to work on, of course. So I suppose there are a couple of ways to think about what kinds of requirements we ask of the cases that we take on. First, of course, we must feel that this is a political condition, a political environment that we are aligned with. That this is this is for example, an anti-racist struggle, an anti-occupation struggle, an anti-colonial struggle, something that we find ourselves aligned with emotionally and politically. But even within that broad scope of cases, we have to select because still there are too many. So we want to take on cases where we think that we can offer something which no other agency can offer. If another research body or legal organization or NGO could do the work that needs to be done in that case, we say, okay, let them do that work. Because we have limited time and limited resources, and we want to target that work most effectively. We are also, as part of the University of London, we are mandated by our research funding to develop new methodologies, to develop new techniques for investigating and for storytelling. So every time we take on a case, we try to either do something completely new or to take a methodology that we've already worked with and to push it further, to see how we can complicate it, make it more complex and make it respond to a more complex environment. So in that sense, there are sort of external and internal conditions. You know, we must align with the case externally, but internally we must also see that there is a way for us to be innovative, because it is that is really the sort of academic component of our work. And that's not only in, that innovation is not only in, let's say, the technical methodology, in the building of digital models or the ways that we can use certain softwares. You know, this interaction with art galleries that we're speaking about, this is also the kind of innovation that we are interested in exploring. Every time we put on a show in close partnership with communities and individuals who have been directly affected by violence, we learn so much from those collaborations, and we see that there are new ways to conduct those collaborations. And as in the examples I've described, we see that there are new ways to use these cultural institutions, to use the relationships that exist within them, to use their position within society, to use their relationship with their environment. We see that we can be strategic in new ways. So really we want to take on cases that we think are our contribution would be vital, where we are aligned with those political causes, and where we have an opportunity to experiment, where we have an opportunity to pioneer new techniques. Thank you for the question.
Thank you to Robert. And we are going to finalize this event with the last question. Your investigations heavily rely on images, and they're exhibited in some contemporary art exhibitions and biennials. What is the leading difference between and how you treat images, like as a research group, and how an artist might deal with them? And sorunun Türkçe özeti ise bir sanatçının imajı ele alış biçimiyle sizinkinin arasındaki farkı nedir?
This is a good question. I would hesitate to draw a strong distinction between the work that we do and the work of artists. In some respects, it's inappropriate to call our work artistic, or to call us artists, but in other respects, it's very appropriate. We deploy aesthetic sensibilities, of course. The title of our director's most recent book, published last year, was Investigative Aesthetics. We consider that aesthetics is a critical part of the toolkit that forensic architecture offers, and we think about its aesthetics like this. We are familiar with the idea of anesthetics. Anesthetics are the things that are administered to you in medical conditions, in medical contexts, when to reduce your sensation, to reduce your feeling, your witnessing. And aesthetics for us is the very opposite of anesthetics. Aesthetics is sensing, is witnessing. So when we talk about material aesthetics and material witnessing, we talk about the careful study of the traces, the material traces that are left, the sensible traces that are left when human rights violations occur. These may be the traces left in a demolished building. They may be the traces left in the body of someone who has suffered tear gas poisoning. They may be the traces that are left in plant matter, in biological matter, when we see herbiciding taking place, or dispossession, or land burning, or sensing, that is to say, can really take place across the full range of not only human but biological and material experience. And it's in that sense that our work is fundamentally aesthetic. So often then we have to read those traces not primarily, not in the first hand. Often we are unable to access the sites of the human rights violations that we are investigating, but we must read those traces, those material or biological traces, through images. So we must pay close attention to images, and we must make those images operative. We must make those images work for our investigations and do work in pursuit of accountability. I think it's no coincidence that forensic architecture has emerged at a time when images and human rights have become entangled in a way that they never were before. We speak about in human rights a series of eras. Let's say we talk about the era of the witness most recently, when human rights evidence was fundamentally and most commonly the witnesses to those violations would speak, and those words would be the evidence for human rights claims. Now we live in a different era. We live in the era of the human rights evidence as images. We are all familiar with the idea that when a bomb falls or lands in an urban environment or in a war zone, that there are many ways that this is documented. People record on their phones, people take photographs, people record the sound of the environment. And it's these that become the fundamental material of human rights claims and of human rights work to pursue and to advocate for accountability. So it's no surprise, I think, that forensic architecture's aesthetic disposition and aesthetic operation has emerged at a time and in response to this mediatization of the world and of human rights claims.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There is another question. Which countries your works have been on display? Çalışmalarınız hangi ülkelerde gösterildi? Şimdi yorumlardan görüyorum. Soruyu soran Tülay Güngen. Bu soruları kendisi Yapı Kredi Kültür Sanatı Genel Müdürü ve aslında bu sergiyi birlikte bizimle hazırlayan ve mümkün kılan insanlardan biri. Kendisine de buradan selam vermek isterim. And the last questions are actually coming from the general manager of Yapı Kredi Culture and Arts, and I also noticed that, and we have a curious team, Robert. So the stage is yours again.
Sure. Gosh, I mean, we have exhibited our work over 200 times now. You know, not always major shows, solo shows, but as part of group shows around the world. So I would, I mean, I can talk about the exhibitions that I have been involved with have been in the UK, in Germany, in the USA, in France and Italy, but also across, I know that we've contributed to shows across East Asia. We exhibited our work in Ramallah, in the Sakakini Cultural Center not too many years ago. This was the foundation of a partnership which has now grown into its own investigative unit, its own forensic architecture unit based in Ramallah. It's fair to say that our work has been exhibited in many countries. I would say likely more than 50. Most recently also we exhibited in Colombia, a commission with the Colombian Truth Commission. That work began as an exhibition at the National Gallery in Bogota, and now begins to move around the country as part of the Truth Commission's work of publicizing and socializing the findings of that commission, which investigated 3 decades of conflict in the country. So really all over the world, and we're delighted about that.
And hopefully there will be more countries. Thank you so much for your time, Robert. We are very happy to be able to show forensic architecture in Istanbul, in Yapı Kredi Kültür Sanat, at Istiklal Street, at the heart of the city. And I would also like to thank you to all my colleagues, especially to our events coordinator, Ahsen Erdoğan, and of course, Mine Bölen, who was managing social media, and of course, not to forget Aykut Yılmaz, who's coordinating the techniques, and of course, all of you who stayed with us for this live event, and hopefully you come back and watch the documentation if you feel like you just missed a point. And yeah, thank you and good night.
Thank you very much.
İyi akşamlar herkese iyi akşamlar. Etkinliğimiz Türkçe altyazıyla tekrar yayınlanacaktır. Bunun için sosyal medyadan bizi takip edebilirsiniz.